Warning, this video is just reading, and so will be the next few videos. The book we'll be reading will be the 5 Nights at Freddy's The Silver Eyes book. This is part 3. Hope you enjoy, like, subscribe for more, it really helps. #Scott Coffin is the best. Let's begin. I will only be reading for 14 minutes at a time. Love you all, and peace. "Daddy," Charlie said, and her father did not look up from his work. "Daddy," she said again, more urgently, and this time he turned to her slowly, as though not fully present in the world. "What do you need, sweetie?" She pointed to the metal skeleton. "Does it hurt?" She wanted to ask for a question, but when she looked into her father's eyes, she found she could not. She shook her head. "Nothing." He nodded at her with an absent smile and went back to his work. Behind him, the creature gave another awful twitch, and its eyes still burned. Charlie shivered and drew herself back to the present. She glanced behind her, feeling exposed. She looked down, and her gaze fixed on something. 3 widely spaced grooves in the ground. She knelt, thoughtful, and ran her fingers over one of them. The gravel was scattered away, the marks worn heavily into the dirt. A camera tripod of some sort. It was the first unfamiliar thing she'd seen. The door to the workshop was cracked open slightly, inviting, but she felt no desire to go inside. Quickly she headed back to her car, but she stopped as soon as she settled into the driver's seat. Her keys were gone, having probably fallen out of pocket somewhere inside the house. She retraced her steps, merely glancing into the living room and the kitchen before heading up to the bedroom. The keys were on the wicker chair beside Theodore the rabbit. She picked them up and jangled them for a minute. Not quite ready to leave the room behind, she sat down on the bed. Stanley the unicorn had stopped beside the bed, as he always did, and as she said that, she patted him absently on the head. It had grown darker while she was inside, and the room was now casting shadows. Somehow, without the bright sunlight, her toys, flaws, and destruction were thrown into sharp relief. Theodore's eyes no longer shone, and his thin fur and hanging ear made him look like a sickly vagabond. When she looked down at Stanley, the rust around his eyes made him look hollow sockets. And his bared teeth, which she had always thought of as a smile, became an awful, knowing grin of a skull. Charlie stood up, careful not to touch him, and hurried towards the door, but her foot caught on a wheel beside the bed. She tripped on the tracks and fell sprawling on the floor. There was a whir of spinning metal, and as she raised herself, a small pair of feet appeared under her nose. Clad in shining patterned leather, she looked up. There above her was Ella, staring down at her, silent and uninvited, her glassy eyes almost appearing to see. The teacups and saucer were held out before her, with a military stiffness. Charlie got up cautiously, taking care not to disturb the doll. She left the room, stepping carefully to avoid accidentally activating any other toys. As Charlie went, Ella retreated to her closet, almost matching her pace. Charlie hurried down the stairs, seized by an urgent to get away. In the car, she fumbled the keys 3 times before sliding it into place. She backed too fast down the driveway, running recklessly over the grass of the front yard, and sped away. After about a mile, Charlie pulled over on the shoulder and turned the car off, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Her eyes focused on nothing. She forced herself to breathe slowly. She reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror so she could see herself. She always expected to see pain, anger, and sorrow written on her face, but they never were. Her cheeks were pink, and her round face looked almost cheerful, like always. Her first weeks living with Aunt Jen, she heard the same things over and over when Aunt Jen introduced her. What a pretty little child! What a happy-looking child she is! Charlie always looked like she was about to smile, her brown eyes wide and sparkling, her thin mouth ready to curve up. But when she wanted to sob, the ingruency was a mild, brutal surge. She ran her fingers through her light brown hair, as though that would magically fix its slight frizziness and put the mirror back into position. She turned the car back on and screeched for a radio station, hoping music might bring her fully back to reality. She flipped from station to station, not really hearing what any of them were playing, and finally settled on an AM broadcast with a host who seemed to be yelling constantly at his audience. She had no idea what he was talking about, but the brash and annoying sound what he was enough to jar her back into the present. The clock in her car was always wrong. So she checked her watch. It was almost time to meet her friends at the diner they had chosen near the centre of town. Charlie pulled back onto the road and drove, letting the sound of angry talk radio hosts move her mind. When she reached the restaurant, Charlie pulled into the lot and stopped, but did not park. The front of the diner had a long picture window across it, and she could see right inside. Though she had not seen them for years, it took her only a moment to spot her friends through the glass. Jessica was easiest to pick out from the crowd. She always enclosed pictures with her letters, and right now she looked exactly like her last photo. Even seated, she was clearly taller than either of the boys, and very thin. Though Charlie could not see the whole outfit she was wearing, a loose white shirt with a embroidered vest and she had a brimmed hat perched on her glossy, shoulder-length brown hair, with an enormous flower threatening to tip it off her head. With an enormous... She was gurgling excitedly about something as she spoke. The two boys were sitting next to each other, facing her. Carlton looked like an older version of his red-headed childhood self. He still had a bit of a baby face, but his features had refined, and his hair was carefully toweled and held in place by a calcamol hair product. He was almost pretty for a boy, and he wore a black workout shirt, though she doubted he'd ever worked out in a day in his life. He slouched forward on the table, resting his chin in his hands. Beside him, John sat closer to the window. John had been the kind of child who got dirty before he even went outside. There would be paint on his shirt before the teacher handed out the watercolours, grass stains on his knees before they came near the playground, and dirt under his fingernails just after he washed his hands. Charlie knew it was him because it had to be, but he looked completely different. His grubbiness of childhood had been replaced by something crisp and clean. He was wearing a neatly pressed light green button-down shirt, the sleeve rolled up and his collar open, preventing him from looking too upright. He was leaning back confidently in the booth, nodding enthusiastically, appearing absorbed in whatever Jessica was saying. The only concession to his former self was his hair, sticking up all over his head, and he had a 5 o'clock shadow, a smug adult version of the dirt he was always covered in as a kid. Charlie smiled to herself. John had been something like a childhood crush, before either of them really understood what that meant. He gave her cuties from his Transformers lunchbox, and once in kindergarten he took them when she broke a glass jar that held coloured beads and arts and crafts. She remembered the moment when it slipped from her hands and she watched it fall. She could not have moved fast enough to catch it, but she would not have tried. She wanted to see it break. The glass hit the wood floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the bees scattered many cluttered among the shards. She thought it was beautiful, and then she started to cry. John had a note sent home to his parents, and when she told him for thank you, he had winked at her with irony beyond his years and simply said, "What for?"